from this day to that, for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. Well, I came across this one article here from Mises, and we'll get into that. And the title of the article, Alan Greenspan admits Ron Paul was right about gold. And, you know, people want to call you a gold bug if you believe in gold as a more legitimate currency. But history has proven that civilizations throughout the world constantly go back to gold. Even if you look at pre-Europeans coming to the Americas, when you know, you had the Mayans and the Aztecs, gold was a big thing. It's always been a sign of wealth. And then in today's world, it also has a lot of other important uses in electronics. That, and then there's people that believe by ingesting gold that it's healthy for you. I never really looked into that. I'm not wealthy enough to worry about eating gold. We'll get into this article here from Mises, but I want to go ahead and jump kind of directly into a Ron Paul Liberty Report, since we're going to cover this article. He did a Mythbusters this last Friday, or no, this wasn't this last Friday, I don't think. Or was it? Yeah, it was this. Okay. And this one is Mythbusters, No, Gold Didn't Fail as Money. And he talks about, you know, there's a lot of people out there that believe that gold failed, but it really didn't fail. Our government failed us when they went away from gold and silver to back our U.S. dollar, making it where, hey, we can just print as much as we want. And every time we print, what you have in savings or in your pocket diminishes in wealth. So it doesn't have the purchasing power. But if you look at history, when gold has been used as a form of currency, it led to prosperous times. And even when you look at other civilizations throughout history, there's always, other issues that arise, but gold and silver being a form of trade and other precious stones and other things like that tend to be the most prosperous time in those civilizations. But I want to go ahead and dive into this, and we'll go ahead and also get into that Mises article, Ron Paul Liberty Report.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. Today's the day we do Mythbusters, and, our co-host is Chris Rossini. Hey, Chris, good morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. Great to be with you.
Good. Before we get started, I wanted to make a brief announcement. An exciting event occurred today, a number for us that shows that we're reaching more people, and that is the number of subscribers on our YouTube channel is up to over 75,000. And this is very good because it's going to help us finance this channel, although we haven't done a whole lot of that yet. We expect to do that. And I think this is very important. So anybody that would like to see our success, share our program with other people, because we're really excited about the growth. The growth curve is very interesting and very positive. And Chris, for today's program, understand we might talk a little bit about gold, and we have to try to decide whether gold is money or not.
Yes, gold actually is money, has been money for thousands of years. And although it may be a little strange for people to realize, it wasn't too long ago that gold was the international medium of exchange. And the world experienced economic growth like it has never seen before. The common myth is that gold failed as money, but we're going to bust that myth today because, in fact, it was the U.S. government who, over many decades, weaned Americans off of real money and got us onto Federal Reserve notes. So the Fed was founded in 1913, and it was World War I that got the ball really rolling. So, Dr. Paul, start us right there.
Oh, yes. And the general understanding of history is that wars are never fought from savings. The people don't donate the money, or they're not willing to be taxed. It's always financed. War is always financed by either taxation, which the people end up resisting. So most of the time it's financed through inflation. That is the creation of new money. So the Federal Reserve is very instrumental. It's interesting how quickly they got that war going, after 1913 and World War I. In the very older days, when the gold was the money, wars were fought by the confiscation of gold of other countries back in Roman Empire times. And now it's a little bit more sophisticated. It is through the printing press that they are able to create this credit. But I'm amazed about the history of this time after the Fed was created in 1913. Even in early 1914, even before the very first meeting of the Fed, they were anxious to get the Fed started because there was a lot of financial activity going on because the war had already started in Europe, and there was a lot of buying of goods from America and a lot of financial things going on, and they were anxiously waiting for the Fed in early 1914 to be involved. Well, they were involved for, those 4 years until, of course, 3 years in 1917 when we got involved. But it was, literally suspending the gold standard, just as they did in the Civil War period, just as we even did, in the Revolutionary time when we had the Continental Dollar. We inflated that and destroyed that currency. Civil War, we had the greenback period. The populist movement just printed greenbacks, and that didn't work, but we reversed that trend. But in World War I, there was a lot of inflation. During that period of time, prices doubled. Prices were going up. But the interesting thing is we were in a unique position because we weren't involved in the war at the beginning, and people were buying stuff from us. Gold was coming in, which allowed us to, the prices would be inflated just from that. And people were buying these goods and services, and we loaned a lot of money. And that whole thing, as it transpired through World War I, set the stage for the pound to be removed as the reserve currency of the world. So the British pound then faded as the dollar became stronger. But World War I was fought with inflation. There's no doubt about that. And the interesting thing is, even then, the rules of the Austrian school prevailed that said, when you inflate, you have to have a correction. And lo and behold, right after World War I, not immediately, but by 1920, 21, the correction had to come. Prices crashed. There was deflationary pressures. But guess what the Fed didn't do? They didn't bail out everybody, and they actually initiated the fall because they raised interest rates, and they considered that a lesson to be learned in the Depression. Oh, that was bad because that really brought that severe depression on. But what they won't recognize and continue not to recognize is that basically the Congress and the Fed were, compared to today, they were hands off, and it was severe. And the downturn was sharp, lasted a year. And then it was gone again. And then the Fed went back to printing, and they went back to work. And then we had the inflationary times of the 20s, which ushered in the Depression of the 1930s. But wartime, they always inflate. They always spend. And you think, well, is it the war that makes it convenient for the monetary shenanigans to go on? Or did they change the shenanigans and change the rules and set the stage so they can fight their wars? When you look at this history, it looks like they almost prepared to go to war and set this up. At least it worked into their plans. They changed the rules on monetary policy, gave so much power, to the Federal Reserve to do these things. And then, they ended up, bailing out everybody, running up debt, increasing the inflation. And of course, it was the war to end all wars. Everybody was euphoric, and we went into the war and it was quickly over. So nobody would say, oh, that was terrible, that the Fed financed that war. Well, it would have been a lot better off for the world because that was the war that led to other problems throughout the century. But eventually, even though they didn't suspend the gold standard, they ignored it. So they did what they want, and the Fed did whatever they wanted. But eventually, in the 20s and all, they recognized that people were still allowed to own gold. The American people were allowed to own gold at least for another decade until Roosevelt came in. So there was those individuals who believed in the welfare warfare state. The seeds were all planted in 1913. They also knew that they had to have monopoly control over the monetary system, being able to expand and shrink at will, because that's how they could finance the war and also introduce this notion to the welfare system. Of course, in the early stages, or if you win a war, people, we can't argue with that. This was a benefit. But the whole thing is, if they stuck to their guns and stuck with the gold standard, we wouldn't have the problems that we face today. It was the introduction of totally ignoring, sound money and getting rid of the restraints that the Federal Reserve should provide, or the gold standard provides, for restraining government growth. That's the most important part of the gold standard, as well as economic growth, which should please everybody.
Yes, next, the ball was rolling, so we're going to move to World War II and FDR, and they would strike another major blow against gold as money. We're all familiar with Ben Bernanke's famous helicopter money quote from not too long ago, and he brags about the printing press. Well, the U.S. Treasury Secretary from back then, William Wooden, said the following: "The Federal Reserve Act lets us print all we need, and it won't frighten the people. It won't look like stage money. It'll be money that looks like real money." So, Dr. Paul, FDR and World War II, please talk about that.
Right. They had benefit, and they wanted to benefit by reinstating the principles that they used in World War I, even though they drifted back to trying to follow gold. The Depression prompted Roosevelt to take the people off the gold standard. You couldn't buy gold. And, I remember most of my lifetime, or a significant part of it, we weren't allowed to own gold. We could have silver, but up until 1975, until gold was renewed, this gave license to this spending in big government and war. Now, during World War I, they had Liberty bonds, and there was a significant amount of money, but people never give the government enough money and loan it to the government enough to finance the war. It's sort of a conditioning. It's a psychological thing. World War II, I can remember it very clearly that we as kids on our newspaper routes, we would go and collect quarters and dimes and nickels and put them in a little folder and try to work up to a $25, which would have been an $18 bond. And we were doing, this great service to finance the war. But the real financing was the massive monetary inflation, much more so in World War II than in World War I. But they had to have the monopoly control of the money. So they weren't allowed to own the gold. It was a little bit easier to move into the unlimited amount of inflation. And once again, do they change the rules in order to fight the war, or is the war started and then they have to resort to it? And it might be a little bit of each. Let's have it in place because maybe we need a little war here and there. Maybe we don't want one as big as World War II, but we might need to bomb a few countries here and a few countries there, and we'll just run up a debt. So wars are dependent on inflation, and gold has been put on the back burner. And I can remember clearly when I asked Bernanke, "Is gold money?" And he paused. He says, "No." So I challenged him whether or not. You mean you can repeal 6,000 years of history? And he's mumbled sort of something, yes. And I said, well, why do you guys in the central bank hold the gold then if you've repealed the gold standard? Well, tradition. I said, why don't you hold diamonds or some other commodity? And the answer, of course, is what he was evading, that gold is money, and I even said that in committee. It's not because I say it's money. I can't make gold money, but history can make gold money, and human instincts can. And yes, you can still have modern, financial transactions, with computers and all, but you still have to have, a definition of what the monetary unit is. And right now, there is no definition. The market says there is. And those who think that gold has failed, all they have to do is look and say, well, if in 1971 is when I was really starting to look at this, that if you'd have taken $10,000 in cash and put it in a box, or $10,000 worth of gold and put it in a box, if you go back and compare that $10,000 in gold is astronomically huge compared to that $10,000 that shrunk. It's probably down to $1,000 worth of purchasing power, and gold might be hundreds of times of greater value. But they will continue to bash it. And one thing that's interesting is the shift in attitude when the debates were going on over the Spanish-American War. The industrialists and the bankers even were very much against William Jennings Bryan, because he wanted to inflate with silver, and they were adamant. No, that was inflationary, and they believed strongly in the gold standard. And if you didn't believe in the gold standard, you were a really oddball. But now it's reversed. The banks and, the businessman think that the gold standard is the craziest thing ever. But economic laws still exist out there. Deficit financing all have consequences. Stupid foreign policies have consequences. Still as just as a runaway welfare state has consequences. But the one thing is, they will lose the argument that gold is no longer relevant. It's still looked at every single day. And I've talked to a few economists that would lead in our direction. When you wake up in the morning, what do you look at? the price of gold, because it is a bellwether, but it's not going to be instantaneous. You know, you might have to look at it for 10 or 15 or 20 years. You know, in 1971, if anybody would have told us, even have told me in 1971, that gold would, you know, you go up to $1,800 and down to $1,200 and get ready to go into $3,000, we couldn't have believed it could have been that bad, but it keeps going along. But that is the store of value, and that is where monetary policy will eventually retreat to. And it won't be because the politicians decide it's a good idea. It will be decided by economic laws. And finally, when people, for practical reasons, will start using gold and silver again.
Yes, and speaking of 1971, that's our next topic. And by this time, Americans were off of gold domestically. So just to point out, gold did not fail. This was a government operation here. And 1971 would be the coup de grace, because it was at that time that Nixon would shut out foreigners from even cashing in their dollars for gold. So Dr. Paul, talk about 1971 and how it led us to the situation we face today.
Yeah, the destruction of the standard that we follow here was incremental from the very first year in 1914 on with the creation of the Fed. That was the whole thing. In 1933 was the destruction and the elimination of the gold standard domestically, because the American people couldn't own gold. And 1971 was the end of the international gold standard. So even though we have been the powerhouse economically and militarily, which does bestow some confidence in the paper, so we were able to continue to do that. But eventually, foreign aid and foreign adventures and fighting wars and everything that we were doing overseas, we were printing a lot of money, and people knew even by 1968, this isn't going to work. The American people turned against General de Gaulle because he was the Frenchman, and he said, hey, you guys are printing money like crazy, and he still believed in the gold standard. So they were doing very bad things to America. They were actually sending greenbacks, dollars back to America and taking their gold out. And that made a lot of Americans mad, because that was an insult to us. But that was when it was known that it would fail. In 1933, Nixon announced, we don't have enough gold. We have to have a little bit left over just in case gold really is money. So he closed the gold window, so no more gold could go out. And that just turned on, the printing presses. I think it's interesting. Anytime you get a chance to look at a chart, go back, whether it's deficits or regulation, size of government, money supply, or the cost of living, and look at from 71 up until the current age, and it's exponential. It just skyrockets. And it's all related to the fact that it's the destruction of the value of the money, and that is to me very important. Now, with all that said, and that's going in the wrong direction, actually, there was one significant event that has helped the American people. It has helped gold. It helped the understanding, because ironically, in the 1970s, early 70s, at the height of the Cold War, there were only two countries in the world that you weren't allowed to own gold, and that was the Soviets and Americans. But in 75, with the effort of many of the people who, like myself, believed in gold, gold was re-legalized, where the American people could buy gold. And Henry Royce, who was the chairman of the banking committee, he says, it was guaranteed that you could always get $35 an ounce. And Royce he wasn't exactly an automatic endorser of the Federal Reserve, but he hated gold. He was a populist in the sense that Congress gets to print the money. So he made this prediction. He says, you can't do this. If you do that, you know what's going to happen? Gold will go to $5 an ounce. And everybody laughed at him. So it didn't quite do that. The gold standard was finally ended. And then, of course, we're at this stage now where the value of the dollar is artificially high, and we've already have been watching the cracks. And the ultimate crack will be prices are going to go up, and we're in the midst of the early stages of stagflation. That's going to continue to get worse.
Yes, finally, Dr. Paul, let's try to end on a positive note here. We've shown that gold has not failed, that government took us off, and it has produced a century of wars, world wars, Cold Wars, Vietnam, Middle East, and a massive welfare state. Now, ultimately, this will have a happy ending, and that's what we'll talk about. And before you get to your thoughts here, I'm going to read a quote from Gilbert Chesterton. He said, "The golden age only comes to men when they have forgotten gold." I think we're there, Dr. Paul. Please take it away.
Yes, and that is the case. When everybody thinks it's gone and dead and buried, it comes back, because that's what people have resorted to over the centuries. You know, the big empires, huge empires of ancient times, the Roman Empire, all of them ended when the gold standard ended. And I remember a conversation I had with President Reagan, and I had a one-on-one visit with him because I was leaving a meeting with the Gold Commission, and we were flying in a helicopter, and he knew I was interested in gold, and he actually himself was interested and didn't think it was that practical at this time. But he says, any great nation that has gone off the gold standard no longer remains great. And I remember that, and that's a pretty close quote. So he understood that, and that is true, that some of the great empires that had listed, like the Byzantine Empire, I think it was 1,000 years or so, they had the bezant, which was gold, and it was the currency of the world, and it lasted until they started diluting that value. That time will come back. The laws are there. People want things of real value, and when that comes, I think there will be a restoration of freedom, because it was the goal to spend money carelessly and without work and hard effort, by just printing it with a monopoly control, that they have been doing this. And now, if we go back to better times, because this system is going to fail, as I've said so many times, that what do you do to have restore confidence? Have something of real value that the politicians can't print, and live within our means. You know, some of the old-fashioned rules, yes, they will come back, but it'll have to come back with a lot more education. A whole generation has to understand what's going on, but it can shift rather quickly. Just as the downside can go pretty fast, I think the upside can say, hey, look, this doesn't work. What do we need to do? And they'll sit down and decide that what we need is restoration in the confidence in money, and therefore it has to have something of real value. That's what we should be dealing with. The founders tried to do that when they said nothing but gold and silver can be used as legal tender, which we have totally ignored. So it's out there. The seeds have been around, and this is nothing new in history. And my intense interest in the gold standard is that I have an intense interest in liberty. And you cannot preserve liberty if you have a central bank printing money and allowing the control to be in the very wealthy and the banks and the politicians. That is a bad situation, but it'll be reversed, and that's what we have to strive for. We have to understand our goals and then work for them. But Chris, I want to thank you very much today for being with us on this special program on Gold is Money.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And I want to thank our audience for being with us today. And please come back soon to the Ron Paul Liberty Report.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Go check them out. Subscribe. Give me a second as I get this article opened up here. Maybe. Okay. This is from Mises.org, MISES, and this is from the Mises Wire. Alan Greenspan admits Ron Paul was right about gold. In the next issue of the Austrian, David Gordon reviews Sebastian Malaby's new book, The Man Who Knew, about the career of Alan Greenspan. Malaby points out that prior to his career at the Fed, Greenspan exhibited a keen understanding of the gold standard and how free markets work. In spite of his contradiction, Malaby takes a rather benign view towards Greenspan. However, in his review, Gordon asked the obvious question: if Greenspan knew all this so well, isn't it all the more worthy of condemnation that Greenspan then abandoned these ideas so readily to advance his career? Sorry, guys. Keep sneezing. Perhaps not surprisingly, now that his career at the Fed has ended, old Greenspan, the one who defends free markets, has now returned. This reversion to his former self has been going on for several years. And Greenspan reiterates this fact yet again in a recent interview with Gold Investor magazine. Greenspan is now a font of sound historical information about the historical gold standard. I view gold as a primary global currency. It is the only currency, along with silver, that does not require a counterparty signature. Gold, however, has always been far more valuable per ounce than silver. No one refuses gold as payment to discharge an obligation. Credit instruments and fiat currency depend on the creditworthiness of a counterparty. Gold, along with silver, is one of the only one of the only currencies that has an intrinsic value. It has always been that way. No one questions its value, and it has always been a valuable commodity. First coined in Asia Minor in 600 BC. The gold standard was operating at its peak in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a period of extraordinary global prosperity, characterized by firming productivity growth and very little inflation. But today there is a widespread view that the 19th century gold standard didn't work. I think that's like wearing the wrong size shoes and saying the shoes are uncomfortable. It wasn't the gold standard that fell. It was politics. World War I disabled and fixed exchange rate parties, and no country wanted to be exposed to the humiliation of having a lesser exchange rate against the U.S. dollar than it enjoyed in 1913. Britain, for example, chose to return to the gold standard in 1925 at the same exchange rate it had in 1913 relative to the U.S. dollar, which was $4.86 per pound sterling. That was a monumental error by Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Ecuador. It introduced a severe deflation for Britain in the late 1920s, and the Bank of England had to default in 1931. It wasn't the gold standard that wasn't functioning. It was these pre-war parties that didn't work. All wanted to return to pre-war exchange rate parties, which, given the different degree of war and economic destruction from country to country, rendered this desire in general wholly unrealistic. Today, going back to the gold standard would be perceived as an act of desperation, but if the gold standard were in place today, we would not have reached the situation in which we find ourselves. Greenspan then says nice things about Paul Volcker's high interest rate policy. Paul Volcker was brought in as chairman of the Federal Reserve, and he raised the federal fund rate to 20% to stem the erosion of the dollar's value during the inflationary 1970s. That was a very destabilizing period and by far the most effective monetary policy in the history of the Federal Reserve. I hope that we don't have to repeat the exercise to stabilize the system, but it remains as an open question. Ultimately, though, Greenspan claims that central bank policy can be employed to largely imitate a gold standard. No, you can't. When I was chair of the Federal Reserve, I used to testify before U.S. Congressman Ron Paul, who was a very strong advocate of gold. We had some interesting discussions. I told him that U.S. monetary policy tried to follow signals that a gold standard would have created. That is sound monetary policy, even with a fiat currency. In that regard, I told him that even if we had gone back to the gold standard, policy would not have changed all that much, which we know that to be basically a lie. And I want to point out that if we went to back to the gold standard, we would have a problem. Really, how England did it was not correct all the way, but it wasn't as far off as Greenspan puts it. It's that society doesn't understand. And we look at it now, you know, if you've ever seen a Mark Dice video where he gives a person the option of a, you know, piece of gold or silver versus a candy bar, and they take the candy bar every time. There's a reason that countries that try to go directly back to the gold standard have issues because, one, they try to go back to rates that would favor them. And then they forget what that does to the middle class and the lower class people when it comes to economic status. It hurts them the most. So when you look at that, it's no wonder empires fall after going off the gold standard, because they get put into a situation where there is no education or understanding of the gold standard for society to be ready to go back to it, even though it would prosper more under that gold standard. I'm going to get back here. This is a rather strange claim. However, it is impossible to know what signals a gold standard would have created in the absence of the current system of fiat currencies. It is, of course, impossible to recreate the global economy under a global or a gold standard in an economy and guess how the system might be imitated in real life. This final explanation appears to be more the sort of the thing that Greenspan tells himself so he can reconcile his behavior at the Fed with what he knows about gold and markets. Nor does this really address Ron Paul's concerns expressed for years toward Greenspan and his successors. Even if monetary policy makers were attempting to somehow replicate a gold standard environment, Paul's criticism was always that the outcome of the current monetary regime can be shown to be dangerous for a variety of reasons. Among these problems are enormous debt loads and stagnant real incomes due to inflation. Moreover, thanks to Catalan effects, monetarily induced inflation has a worse impact on lower income households. Even Greenspan admits this is the case with debt. We would never have reached this position of extreme indebtedness were we on the gold standard, because the gold standard is a way of ensuring that fiscal policy never gets out of line. Certainly, debt loads have taken off since Nixon closed the gold window in 1971, breaking the last link with gold. And they have a chart here. It has the gross federal debt as percent of gross domestic product, percent of GDP annual, not seasonally adjusted. And you see, we're flattened out between 1965. We stay the same until we get up to about 1980, and it just keeps going up from there. But go check it out, Mises.org, MISES.org. Like I said, I've always recommended people have at least some gold and silver in reserves for inflationary reasons. People think gold and silver go up in price. No, your dollar drops in value. The silver dime, when they were produced, and our dimes were actually made out of silver, it would get you a gallon of gas. That same silver dime is still worth a gallon of gas. Same with gold. You know, it will fluctuate a little bit, but for the majority, it has the exact same purchasing power. One other thing that makes a lot of people think, you know, well, it doesn't really have too much purchasing power, is the fact that there's a lot of people that, again, would pick a candy bar over a gold bar. But anybody that has created wealth for themselves, I guarantee they would take the gold over cash. Okay, I want to move along here. You're already coming. 15 minutes to the top of the hour. I'm trying to figure out what I want to hit first. Someone did send me this that they seen it on Drudge, and they were kind of asking, you know, what I felt of it. And this was out of Yahoo News, yahoo.com. Iran ready to give U.S. slap in the face, says Commander. Dubai, Reuters. The United States should expect a strong slap in the face if it underestimates Iran's defense capabilities, a commander of the elite Revolutionary Guard said on Wednesday as Tehran concluded war games. Since taking office last month, the U.S. President Donald Trump has pledged to get tough with Iran, warning the Islamic Republic after its ballistic missile test on January 29th that it is playing with fire and all U.S. options were on the table. The enemy should not be mistaken in its assessments, and it will receive a strong slap in the face if it does make such a mistake, said General Mohammed Pakpour, head of the Guards Grounds Forces, quoted by the Guards website, SEPA News. On Wednesday, the Revolutionary Guards conclude 3 days of exercises with rockets, artillery, tanks, and helicopters, weeks after Trump warned that he had put Tehran on notice over the missile launch. The message of these exercises for the world, arrogance is not to do anything stupid, said Pakpour, quoted by the semi-official news agency Tasnim. Everyone could see today what power we have on the ground. The Guards said they test-fired advanced rockets and used drones in the 3-day exercises, which were held in central and eastern Iran. And it goes on to talk about Hezbollah and the U.S. and Trump. But anyone that knows me knows that I'm a strong, supporter of getting out of the Middle East, getting out of a lot of countries that we have bases in, and having less of a foreign presence on foreign ground. Now, if we want to have more of a Air Force and Navy type deal where we have assets in place, if we needed them, would be another, issue. But the amount of bases in the amount of countries, we're not going to tackle the monetary policy when the inflation and the printing of money goes along with our empire, expansion across the world. And I think throwing money into the Middle East is, one, creating enemies, and two, draining our pockets. This can't go on forever. And McMaster is talked about sending more troops to the Middle East. But what about, Trump's policies? I'm hoping that we will involve ourselves less militarily all over the world, but especially in the Middle East, and really have a true defensive stance rather than an offensive stance. I guess I'll just go ahead and cue that. I'm going to cover one more Ron Paul Liberty report. This will probably be the last clip I play of the night, but this one was from today, and there's reports that there has been a hold put on CIA weapons being shipped into Syria. And with everything, going on in the Middle East, I think Syria, we know that's part of the military-industrial complex's goal, is to destabilize Syria. And hopefully there's some actual reversal of that policy going on. It's only to be seen what this administration does throughout the first couple of years. And then after the next election, if he's reelected or whoever comes into office. let's go ahead and get into this Ron Paul Liberty Report. We have it queued up here. This one is CIA weapons pause in Syria. Are we backing off or escalating? And, you know, we have the CIA pause in Syria, but we also have McMaster talking about more troops to the Middle East. We've had Trump talk about, you know, will we have to go back in Iraq? And it's really a confusing situation. But hopefully we see within, this year, what steps we're going to take when it comes to our foreign policy. Because, again, we can't really even tackle monetary policy unless we can tackle our foreign policy. So here we go.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to have you here.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, good. I'd like to bring up the subject of Syria. It's been around for a while, but something significant has happened, and that is that our policy seems to be changing. And, of course, we're interested to what? And what we have noticed, and others, because others have reported on it, like Reuters did a little research on there, and they have indicated that all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, a couple of weeks ago, we quit funneling weapons and support to the Free Syrian Army, which would be a big deal. Of course, that was a secret for a long time. Nobody knew about that because back in the days when Libya was falling, there was suspect that we were sending weapons over there, but it was always denied. But it turns out that it's conventional wisdom now to realize that we have been doing this. But the change is that we're not doing this anymore. And the big question is why? Does that mean that we're going to, walk away or just what happens? So this does raise some real significant questions, and they're very interesting because it could mean a whole lot for the future of that whole area, and it will tell us a whole lot about the direction of the new administration on how they're going to handle a most difficult country like Syria and our involvement there.
Yeah, and in a way, we're sort of reading tea leaves because these are somewhat unsourced reports. We don't know all the details, but that's really all we have is tea leaves to read. But, during the campaign, now President Trump very rightly criticized the CIA's program of providing weapons to the rebels. He said, we don't know who the heck we're sending these to. And we do know that a lot of it has gone to Nusra Front, and some of it's landed in the arms of ISIS. So does this mean he's reassessing this program? We don't know.
Well, it certainly needs reassessed, and we have a few suggestions if they call us. If you get a call from the administration, please let me know if they call you, because that could be very interesting. And sometimes our viewers suggest that. Why don't you call them?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't quite work like that. But if there's a serious request ever, we would welcome it. But most likely they can figure out what we believe in rather easily by just tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. But I want to read a short paragraph, a couple sentences, and it's found on Anti-War. And they sort of summarize what's going on in Syria. Now, I'm going to make a little fun of this, but not with anti-war and not to the author, but not only making fun about our foreign policy, but sort of, make fun in the sense that this is a little bit crazy. But this is how they summarize the situation in Syria right now. And I thought it tells us a lot about what we're going to sort out. And it goes, a big issue might have been that when FSA, the Free Syrian Army, formed its anti-Al-Qaeda coalition, the Nusra Front formed its own coalition to fight them. And the CIA program was arming forces in both groups. with the Noor al-Din al-Zinki faction joining the Nusra Front's coalition against the nominally moderate Islamic faction. Well, there it is. I mean, it's clear cut.
Simple.
You know, I keep reading to make sure I can keep all these groups straight. But don't you think this is a bit symbolic of the difficulty in figuring this out, and maybe being a reflection of a deeply flawed foreign policy?
It's like a mouthful of bubble gum, you know.
Right.
But you know, so essentially, what they're saying is the CIA is fighting the CIA in this one group. Because remember, we did a show 6 or 7 months ago where the CIA people were fighting the Pentagon people. So I guess they're making progress or regress.
Yeah, but they don't address the subject of who's protecting the American people, the American taxpayer, who's protecting our national security. Of course, they argue, they don't say so often our national interests. We're all over the place. Our national interests, which are usually corporate interests, or specialized interests in particular countries that serve our financial interests too. That frequently is what we're doing. They don't seem to have American people first in mind.
We don't count. Here's something that jumped out at me from the Reuters article. It said the halt in assistance to the Free Syrian Army includes salaries, training, ammunition, and anti-tank missiles. And it jumped out at me the word salaries. So the American taxpayer is paying the salaries of Free Syrian Army fighters that are fighting to overthrow the sovereign government of Syria. Could you imagine some American who's been unemployed? You know, we've talked about the labor participation rate being historically low. He's unemployed, he can't get a job, yet we're paying the salaries of these fighters overseas.
Now they're going to cut the salaries. I wonder if they have a payout period, you know. They'll get a bonus. So, but, you know, when they were researching this a little bit, you know, a lot of times they will get information from anonymous sources and they're not, you know, tell exactly where it's coming from. And that was the case in the Reuters article because this is secret stuff. And Trump has emphasized this, that don't tell the enemy what we're going to do. This has to be secret. And besides, we can't do this is CIA stuff and it's covert and it's very important. But when you put that in comparison to what we don't get to hear that we have a right to hear is, you know, the Congress needs to know this. They have to finance it. They don't seem to ask all the questions they should. And also the American people, sometimes they don't care and sometimes they're not listening. But, you know, and I argue the case, congressional oversight, but there's nothing automatic. It's still back to philosophy, because what if the people who are doing the oversight are more hawkish than the administration? You know, so let's say there's too much hawkishness in the administration and we want oversight. Yeah, then you get a guy like Paul Ryan and a bunch of others. Well, even Mike Pence, you know, they want more. So it's there seems to be very little restraint. And that, of course, is what we try to do here is stir the interests of the people to have an understanding, because I believe that is what eventually is reflected in what the members of Congress are thinking about, to put the pressure on them philosophically, rather than thinking that we're going to have a magic oversight. But right now, I don't think on issues like this that this administration, because they said, this stuff has to be secret. The enemy can't know. And they have a point there. You know, if we were in World War II, we don't want them to know when invasions are occurring. That's completely different than these covert operations. I mean, everything the CIA do. I think it's amazing how it was secret and denial when all this started, and you were some un-American conspiracy person if you argued, why are you sending weapons to Syria? Now it's commonplace. Oh, yeah, we did this, but it's covert, and we can't tell you exactly what's going on.
Yeah. You know, when I first read that there was this pause in the pipeline of weapons, I thought, well, maybe they're coming to their senses. And then I read on a little bit, and we talked about this earlier, that the commander of the U.S. Central Command, Joseph Votel, told NBC News that we may be sending troops into Syria. And we've talked about McMaster not wanting others to fight these battles. This may actually be not such good news if this is the case.
So, I mean, that's a toss-up, and we don't have the answer to that because if it's backing off, and since there is evidence that right now that Al-Qaeda has sort of been on the run, they're not having these tremendous victories. Of course, who's winning then? Assad and the Russians, which doesn't go well with, you know, Saudi Arabia and our so-called allies. They don't like that. So this is the key question, and the idea is, Are they backing off because they want to have less involvement, or are they backing off for one reason? Change the strategy in going more toward what McMaster's has written about as the admired intellectual and the kind of thing that Graham and John McCain, they love, and Tom Cotton, they love this guy because he's an intellectual, but he's not he's in no way going to be pushing really backing off if the intent is to deal with ISIS. Even if they wanted to back off a little bit, the announced goal of the administration is to go any place, anytime, anywhere, as long as there's a terrorist suspect in the world. That's where we have to go. So I don't see how they can walk away. But then again, it's up for grabs, and it may go in the direction of what we would like, backing off and let the dust settle and maybe accept the fact that the Syrian people, the Syrian people still have a say in it. I don't think Assad could maintain the power that he has now if he didn't get some support from the Syrian people. There are probably plenty that hate his guts more, in the East and in the West, but he's held on to this. So I think that this is still up for grabs, but what shouldn't be up for grabs, we should be more explicit, and hopefully there's enough influence in this country to have our administration be less imperialistic.
Yeah, and our friend Doug Bandow had a good piece in Forbes that we noticed, and he makes some very good points. First of all, this isn't our fight. He said that, ISIS is bad, but their goal was to establish a caliphate, a physical presence in eastern Iraq or eastern Syria and parts of Iraq. And he says, although ISIS is hostile to America, we know that, its principal enemies are the states in the Middle East, Shiite Iraq, Syria's Alawite government, the independent-minded Serbs or Kurds, and Sunni monarchies. They're the real enemies. So why would we go over there and get involved and provoke them into becoming our enemies? But he said, DC has no idea what it's getting into when it went in 2014, and still committed to regime change, even though Assad was the greatest barrier to these Islamic extremists.
We pointed out with it, they've been following these policies for 15 years. They don't have any real successes, but the enemy still, including Trump involvement with that, the real enemy is Iran. They're going to nuke everybody, and yet I think even Israel made a statement the other day that said no. Somebody from Israel, I don't know if it was official, but he made a statement that Israel's probably better off because we know more about their nuclear program. But if you look at all the strategy from 9/11 onward, everything that we have done, to protect our friends over there and to win this war has been helpful to Iran. I mean, just think of what was going on in Iraq. But here, right now, this is a big battle in Syria, because if this continues to go and Assad, has the victory, it's a victory for Russia and a victory for Iran. And this is something I think the neocons know. And they see that as much more sinister and terrible than some others, because I quite frankly think the Syrians ought to make this decision. But it seems like they don't accomplish what they want. They always fail, and they always help the countries they consider their worst enemies, and they continue to do it.
And what they won't say, what Washington won't say, is that Iran is our ally in Syria and Iraq. That's simply a fact. They're fighting the people that we say we're against. The liberation of East Mosul in Iraq was accomplished largely through the use of the Shia militias that are backed by Iran. But we don't want to talk about that, and we won't talk about it. We won't give them any credit, which is silly.
But Daniel, isn't that just sort of halfway? Because we don't want Assad in there. Yeah. So they're on two sides of that issue. But that goes back to this statement I read about the chaos and trying to sort these positions out.
Well, here's Paul Ryan. It's in our vital national interest. We must destroy ISIS in Syria. But, Doug Bandow makes a point. Why? The other countries are already doing it. They're on the ropes. They're on their last leg. And remember what Trump said about NATO. You guys got to step up and do more of the fighting. We can't do everything. So here's an example where the other guys have stepped up. They are fighting the fight for us. Why do we want to go poking at the hornet's nest?
That's the whole thing. But it seems like the opposition to our policy and even opposing Trump in the House is very strong, and they're very successful in what they're doing. And it's disturbing to say the least, because they're not going to pay much attention to the Doug Bandow's article today to point out these things, because they just buckle down and they're more determined than ever if you point this out.
Yeah, and if we just have another second, one point that Doug has made, but we've made on the show many times, this is all about we've got to get ISIS out of Raqqa, their capital in Syria. That's why the Americans have got to go in. But Doug makes a point that we've made. If U.S. forces took Raqqa, then what? What comes next? Do we say, okay, thanks, guys, and we pull out? No, that's not going to happen. We're not going to hand it over to Assad because we're still essentially in favor of regime change. Who are we going to give it to? What's going to happen if we take it?
I want to bring up a theoretical point in a way. A lot of us who are opposed to our imperialistic foreign policy, we want to back off because we're too strong, too tough when we run the world. And we do a lot of that. But what about looking at it another way? And Trump alludes to this. He says, yeah, but we're sick and tired of it. We'll do this, but we're tired of paying for it. So we'll do it, but you have to pay for it. But what about if somebody looked at this and said that since we've had so many failures in our policy, maybe we have been duped into being the patsies, for these other countries who want us to do these things. It's not our policy. We don't do it. But we go ahead and we march in and we get rid of this guy and this guy over here. And we do that. So we have become not so much the dominant feature, and we run things. We pay the bills, which Trump recognizes. But maybe we've been the patsies and we've been fighting wars for other people. It wasn't, did the American people, when the American people were asked about the Persian Gulf War, and after 9/11, it was a little bit different. But the American people basically said, what do we have to go over there for? And there's still a lot of that sentiment. But we go over there because, maybe those forces I'm alluding to, maybe they're in collision with the deep state. They get us to do things. But there's I think there's a possibility that the practical results might be what I'm talking about, even though it might not have been their plan. But we end up fighting for the interests of other people, not our national interests.
Well, here's a great example. Think about Libya. France was the #1 country. They were out there in front. We got to overthrow Gaddafi. We got to take care of it. The U.S., of course, came in and did the dirty work. What happened next? France went in and took all the oil wells, Well,
that makes the point pretty good. No, that's for sure. No, I think this is an interesting change in the policy that's going on now that the evidence is out there that we have backed off in giving weapon support and maybe moral support to the Free Syrian Army. And what it means maybe we're going to back off, which would be great, and I doubt. Or we may be changing strategy because the hint of strategy is different. There's a determination in this administration to fight terrorism. Of course, we're all against terrorism, but we ought to understand why there are terrorists out there. And if that is the case, are they going to be taking information and strategy from General McMaster? If that is the case, we have him on record exactly what he wants. And it's the opposite of, bomb and run, which isn't a good strategy either. That was pretty ridiculous. But his strategy, if you're going to fight, do it right way and don't depend on other troops. They're not reliable. You can't train them. That happened, and he wrote about Vietnam. It didn't work there. We can't do that. So if we think it's important, more troops, more troops, more troops. So we're at a critical impasse right now on foreign policy. What's going to happen in Syria? It may be symbolic of what's going to happen in the entire Middle East and even in a much broader sense. So that is the reason that we're going to be talking about this, and we'll be visiting with this again in not the too distant future, because it could change any day now on exactly what's happening. But once again, though, for our viewing audience, I want to thank you very much for tuning in today, and we thank you, and please come back soon.
Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com, and Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube. Again, subscribe, check them out. Now, with almost every administration, it's been a continual involvement in the Middle East, even under Clinton. Now, I think what's different here is Trump tends to be on the opposite side of things from everyone around him. They say one thing, he says the opposite. So it's real hard to really judge what is going to happen in the Middle East. Are we going to continue to be involved in multiple countries and waging these wars, even when we don't call them wars? What is the future going to look like if we continue, and if we pull out completely, or if we take a middle ground? These aren't things that are really being talked about. But I'm sure the anti-war left that only comes out when it's a Republican candidate will definitely be bringing a lot of these issues up. And I think for many that were around in, the 08 election, all the way up to that election and that campaigning, the more libertarian Ron Paul supporters and a lot of the anti-war left tend to work together. And what I've seen after that, we've seen a lot of anti-war left go, we like Ron Paul, we'll help with the Ron Paul. What we truly really seen, I don't think a lot of people realized what they were seeing at the time, but what we seen was the establishment on both sides, the Republicans and Democrats, the progressives on both sides, divide again. Ron Paul was able to bring both sides together where they didn't like that. And at that time, people were starting to consider themselves Tea Partyists. Of course, if you listen to Glenn Beck, and I'm not trying to bash Glenn Beck here, but if you listen to people like Glenn Beck, they don't see that as the beginning of the modern day Tea Party. But it was. That was where they were throwing fake boxes of tea. They were doing the historical type events to campaign and raise awareness about Ron Paul and the policies that our government had. They were the beginning of the modern day Tea Party. And there were people on the left and the right and people in the middle, all a part of that. Well, what happened after that? Well, that was grassroots. That was total grassroots. What a lot of people might have not been paying attention to at the beginning was all of a sudden these Tea Party groups popped up, well funded, and well, when the money's not being shown around that much, they can get people to sign up to their newsletter. Then it became membership free membership. And all of a sudden they got buses, they got planes, they got hotel rooms, they got dining, all this. They have already set up meeting. I mean, it really happened really quickly. But a lot of that part wasn't being looked at because, well, what were the grassroots people doing? They were trying to bring up issues like the Federal Reserve and the economy and foreign involvement. And, well, they weren't really paying attention to, hold on, how did they get, buses with the group's name on it? Where's this money coming from? And before you knew it, people were divided. And where our country is right now is kind of a reflection of that effort. Divide and conquer. In a way, that's what they've been doing in the Middle East. How else do you explain? Well, the Kurds are our allies, and Turkey's our allies. But Turkey abuses their Kurds and tries to undermine those Kurds that are in other countries trying to fight ISIS, even though Turkey is supposed to be our ally and helping against ISIS, except for oil from ISIS is going through Turkey, which the Kurds are trying to stop. Divide and conquer. We're playing multiple sides, and that's what the establishment did with the groups that were coming together for common causes that were coming from the left and the right. They seen what it did for Ron Paul. They seen left and right come together in a money bomb and raised a crazy amount of money at that time from grassroots. If you notice the time it got to the 2012 election, what happened to that support for Ron Paul? If you don't think they were successful with hijacking the Tea Party and the anti-war left, look at the support for Ron Paul before 06, 07, 08, and look what happened time 2012. And there were people that got into Ron Paul's campaign that I believe were a part of that. And they had establishment connections. Now, I kind of want to cover something else that I personally have seen. It's happened to me. It's happened to other people. And then there's other groups that here's some breaking news. This just got a news alert from Fox News. Rescinding bathroom order. Trump administration lifts Obama-era student bathroom guidelines. So we'll probably cover that at another time. But something that I personally have experienced. I know other friends that have. There's some other websites I don't quite understand how they haven't had this problem, or maybe I just don't know about it. But the continued attack on alternative media, and I'm not saying alt-right, I'm saying alternative media, because what has been defined as alt-right is not what I consider myself, and I know others don't either, and I think there's a few out there that they've been called alt-right and they've taken the name. I've warned people multiple times about that. Don't do it. But something that's been happening, I have an article here from Natural News. Google blacklists Natural News, removes 140,000 pages from its index memory holes. Natural News investigates investigative articles on vaccines, farmer corruption, fraudulent science, and more. Says here, late last week I received direct threat that warned if I do not take steps to destroy Alex Jones and InfoWars, I would be targeted for destruction in a campaign of smears, censorship, and defamation, which he put out something a week ago about it. Instead of giving in to the enemy, I refused to take the bait and went to public with details of the threat, warning everyone in the new media that sinister forces were now being pursued to undermine and silence every anti-establishment and pro-Trump voice on the internet. I guess it's pretty good I'm not pro-Trump, but I'm also not anti-Trump. Anti-establishment, yes. True to form, today the entire Natural News website has been blacklisted by Google, entirely without warning. This is just one of many censorship events that have all taken place over the last few days. Last weekend, damning videos were leaked in a focused effort to take out Milo Yiannopoulos, a former Breitbart news editor and gay conservative who has openly supported President Trump. Milo was hit with an attack wave of opposition research and was forced to resign from Breitbart on Monday, citing the cynical media witch hunt that brought him down. Yesterday, InfoWars was blackballed by AdRoll.com, an online advertiser distributing company. According to Alex Jones, the blacklisting by AdRoll will cost InfoWars $3 million in annual revenue, possibly causing InfoWars to abandon plans of opening up a Washington, D.C. bureau to cover the Trump administration with real news instead of fake news from CNN and elsewhere. The Shopify e-commerce platform was aggressively threatened by organized leftists to dump the Breitbart online store and thereby deny revenues to Breitbart. Shopify CEO refused to kowtow to the intimidation and censorship and has maintained a neutral position on political issues, focusing on running e-commerce platforms for everyone. Today, Natural News has been hit by Google, which has blacklisted the entire Natural News domain and removed over 140,000 from pages from its index. The takedown of Natural News happened this morning, and it follows a pattern of censorship we are seeing being leveled against other pro-Trump websites. Google sent no warning whatsoever to our webmaster tools. email address on file with them. The shutdown or the shutoff of natural news was clearly driven by a human decision, not an algorithm. We are currently attempting to determine Google's claimed justification for censoring our entire website, and we hope to have naturalnews.com restored in Google's index. Some of the news now being censored by Google includes our laboratory testing of the U.S. water supply, and it goes on. Google and AdSense and other companies, major companies out there have been doing this to alternative media. But unlike maybe Natural News or InfoWars, or even We Are Change, my website, and some other friends of mine that have had websites that were really, really good. One of them had a grandparent that left them money, and they decided to take a lot of money and put it into doing journalism. And they spent a lot of money to actually report 100% facts. They were not biased, but they were definitely exposing some stuff. But again, they were small and new. They had AdSense drop them, and really a very vague, controversial content, or, all the ones I know that have been dropped, it's really been vague. No true explanation. And many of you that might have experienced this with YouTube, AdSense, Google, Facebook, also know that you don't get to truly talk to people to get a direct response. They give you very vague responses. Why? Because they want to do whatever the hell they want to do, even if it goes past what maybe terms of service might say, and go, if you don't like it, we're not going to talk to you. You'll have to get a lawyer and sue us. These companies have basically made it impossible for people to take care of a problem. Something that if these people had to deal with them, they wouldn't do half of this crap that they do. But because they can hide behind a whole bunch of lawyers, and they know, well, the person that doesn't make a lot of money and dump their life savings into a media company probably won't have the money to try to take on Google, Facebook, Alphabet Inc., and YouTube, Google, AdSense. And I know people that have, again, put a lot of money into it and then had any possibility of any revenue, true revenue, collection ripped from them. And I've had the same thing. I had AdSense. It was fine. Then at one point, they suspend my account and then reinstate it. And I'm like, what was, I don't know what the hell happened there. It happened before I could even really try to figure out what's going on. Of course, it reset. And this was at a point that, my my funds weren't probably anything. I don't know, 10 cents, maybe in my account. But of course, it resets it to zero. And I started doing a lot more articles, reposting, and originals. Started building up audience. Last time I checked, I think I had, and this was early on when I started seeing my website's traffic really pick up. I'm like, cool. I said, I'll check my AdSense just to see if I'm getting anything. I had, I think, $1.20 or something like that. I'm like, cool, whatever, I don't rely on it to run my website, but as the future goes on, I have to be able to put that money back into my website, continue to upgrade, and I would like to be able to get out in the field a lot more. Something that I was kind of relying on multiple ad things to help do that. Well, probably 6 months later, still haven't checked my AdSense. Don't know how much money was in there. But with the increase of traffic that went to my website, I could guesstimate that, it wasn't a lot, but I'm starting to get traffic, so it keeps going up. Well, eventually, they just pulled the plug. And again, a very, very vague response. Suspicious activity. Have no idea what the hell that means. Again, last time I checked, I had like $1.20. I guesstimated I might have had maybe between $5 and $10. And that was probably in a total between, I don't know, 6 to 8 months, maybe a little bit more time they pulled it. So, it's not like I was getting all kinds of money, but it incentivized me to continue doing what I'm doing, to say, hey, I will be able to self-sustain my website and do this. Of course, I'm not going to let that stop me, but it did, to a point, stop me from doing articles. It was very time-consuming. And if I can't break in revenue from that, and I'm not in any way trying to get rich. Really, I just want it to be able to sustain itself. But if I can't do that, I can't put that much energy into it my whole life. I still have a roof that I have to keep over my, head. I still have to put, food in my stomach. My water comes out of the ground, so still have to have the electricity on. And for me, I used to be one of those people that went out, got the newest gadgets, and did a lot of that. And ever since I started my website, I really scaled back from that. I've had the iPhone 4 for about 5 years, just now upgrading, because I don't want to put my money into that. I'd rather put it into, spreading information around. I'm getting information out there. But a lot of these companies they're trying to control the narrative. Anybody, whether it be InfoWars, The Blaze, We Are Change, any of these alternative media, if they go against what the establishment wants, they're going to silence them in ways that you don't have to directly attack them. Pull their revenue sources. The left has been doing this for a long time now. They will harass the hell out of someone that is advertising with a group that they don't like. How many people have had advertisers pull out of their events because the left pressured them? Happens all the time. Okay, I wasn't going to play this. But since we are kind of talking about alternative media, someone that has been attacked multiple times and has had money ripped from them by ad groups. We Are Change, how to and not to change the media. And I think this one's real important. I watched it earlier. When it comes to the media, the mainstream media pretty much stays pretty hard on running the establishments and the progressive talking points. But people getting into the alternative media, they're trying to do something different. They're trying to bring more information, more truth, and not just be the propaganda mouthpiece for the government or a political group or the establishment. They're trying to free people, give the information to the people, let them make their decisions. And I know Luke Rudowski, he's and We Are Change, they have set up basically a their media boot camp type deal. And there's a lot of lessons that Luke and a lot of us in alternative media have learned. And if you're planning on getting into this, one, don't think you're going to get rich doing it. It's not something you're going to get rich in. But another thing is you have to stay true to the truth. And even when it hits you going, if this is true, this shatters what I believe. Well, sometimes we need to shatter what we believe to find the truth. And I think a lot of us have gone through it. But what are things that you should do and things you shouldn't do when getting into the media to help try to change where media has gone as alternative media versus, mainstream media? So let's go ahead and dive into this.
This is Luke Radowski of WeAreChange.org here in Acapulco, Mexico, and I'm actually joined by the one and only Dan Dix of PressForTruth.ca and James Corbett of the Corbett Report. Now, we just wrapped up a very intense boot camp here in Mexico. We went from laughing yoga to meditation to tequila shots to running to doing push-ups to reframing and tricking your mind into positive thinking. We went all out yesterday teaching about 40 students all of our tricks of the trade. We went through everything, but enough of me talking. James, what did you take most from what we did yesterday? What do you think are some of the most important lessons that we went through?
I don't know if it's the most important, but one of the most interesting for me was watching you and how you do the confrontations and how to approach people during confrontations and things like that. It was really interesting because it's obviously different than the style that I usually do. So I really appreciated seeing that, seeing how you do it.
Dan?
I really enjoyed the aspect of teaching others how to inspire others and teaching others how to change themselves and look inside and realize that, you know, if you want to cure the world, if you want to fix things, you have to realize that sometimes it comes down to a problem with mankind's hearts. And that's the fundamental thing that needs to be changed. So I think that's one of the most powerful messages that we got out yesterday. People need to work on themselves before they change the world.
Exactly. Changing yourself before you do change the world and coming from the right kind of aspect, the right kind of energy before getting into this field, because I feel a lot of people want to get into this field of independent, free journalism by looking for validation, looking to get approval from others, and looking just for a source of something to fill their egos. And we see it a lot, but the main lesson that I was trying to teach yesterday, hands-on, one-on-one, was a very important one about not seeking validation, not eating the Pringles. We use the Pringles analogy to describe that, because when you eat Pringles, you're eating empty calories, and your brain is tricked into just sitting there eating the whole damn thing because your mind is tricked into wanting something that you really don't deep down want. And that same thing happens when you look for validation. You trick yourself and you actually get off the true purpose, and you're looking at extrinsic goals, and you will never be fulfilled with those Pringles, with that validation doing this, because it's a hard road. It's not easy. There's a lot of criticism. There's a lot of accountability, especially when you do this, where people online will hold you accountable for a lot of things. And if you just worry about getting YouTube hits and YouTube numbers, you will fail yourself and bring yourself on a mission that will bring you towards negativity and ego fulfillment. And that's why we went through very important lessons and tricks on reframing your mind, on positivity, having the right energy, and doing this for intrinsic reasons, because you want to change the world, because you want to make yourself into a better person, personal development, tips and tricks of just simple psychology of writing down 5 things that you're grateful for each and single day, and practicing that, which actually spurs your prefrontal cortex and actually helps you develop your brain more when you're happier. There's basic science and facts that we broke down to it. Is there anything that you guys want to add when it comes to doing this for the intrinsic reasons? And why do you guys do what you guys do as real independent journalists?
You know, it's kind of like for a writer or an artist or someone like that. They spend years and years learning how to paint or how to write like someone else that they admire, or like trying to copy what people are doing. But it takes years for them to discover how to just be themselves. And I think that's kind of like for a lot of people who start out in alt media. You have all of these influences from different people you've seen, and you want to try to emulate them. But it isn't until you find yourself and you're just authentically you that you can really communicate with an audience. And it's difficult to do that. It really is difficult to do that. But it's so important to try to find that base you, who you are, and just exude it. Because audiences smell BS, and they know it when they see it. And they know authenticity when they see it. So I think that's the most important lesson. It's very hard to teach, but it's really important for people to understand that when they're starting off.
Exactly, especially if you try to be somebody that you're not. It comes off ugly and it comes off unauthentic. Even in the whole dating community, if you come up to a girl and you're trying to validate yourself by trying to get the most amount of girls and you're being fake and you're not being real, you will be shunned away as fast as possible. Same thing when you're doing YouTube videos. If you're not yourself, you're not speaking from the heart, if you're not comfortable in front of the cameras, the audience will see it and they will reject you, just like you would get rejected at a nightclub trying to pick up a girl. Dan, what do you think about everything?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, people are going to spot a phony right off the bat. So in my process of this, I'd have to agree with James. I completely had a better understanding and kind of discovered myself by, questioning all these things, the motives of the government and everything. And I had a better understanding of some of the, because you start to look at the bigger game, the end game, the big picture. You start to question bigger things. So I started to have a better understanding of who I am, what kind of things I want to achieve in life, just by doing the work that I do. So it's really made me who I am. It's all I know.
Yeah. Writing your goals, finding intrinsic goals, going after your passions is extremely important. And now we have the option to do that. Us three here, are living proof of that. We're real, free, independent news, reliant solely on you and your viewership. We also went over very important things on not what to do, on some ethical things that people should be wary of. For the very fact, if you have a news organization and you're starting out to be a independent journalist, if you are promoting about how Fukushima is going to pollute the entire world and kill off a large number of populations, we don't think it's ethical for you to sell iodine and tell you it's the cure against what's going to happen with Fukushima. Same thing with Ebola. If you're fear-mongering about how Ebola is going to wipe out half of the population of the earth, and then you're selling the immune system Ebola cure, that's unethical. When you're promoting how the U.S. dollar is going to collapse and you're saying people should buy gold and silver when it's at its highest, that is not right, and it's unethical. And there's some boundaries and lines being drawn right now because this is a totally new entire field. But discovering things like that, talking about real issues, and making sure that your news does not conflate with your dollar is extremely important to keep independent media authentic, real, but also successful in beating the mainstream media, is being as honest as you can with what you're doing and not letting the bottom dollar conflate with what you're doing. I know, James, you expanded on this in so many different ways, but how do you see the whole emerging market? Because you have a whole other system which you survive and which you thrive on.
Yeah, it's so strange for me to talk about this because all of my funding sources are exactly what you wouldn't do if you were trying to build a business. I don't do advertising, and I don't. The only money I get is from International Forecaster for writing a newsletter once a week. Other than that, I don't do videos for money. I don't do things for money. All I do is ask for the audience to donate, to subscribe. I am absolutely blessed and humbled to have an audience that will do that and to support this work. And I don't take that for granted. I think that what is happening right now is, for the first time, really, truly, honestly, I mean this from the bottom of my heart, first time in history, human beings are able to do collaborative types of work like this for very little money with the setup we have, with the sort of crude amateur technology we have, to send it worldwide and to get supported directly by the people who are watching it, rather than going through some big, third-party corporation that's going to publish it in some office thousands of miles away. It's a stupid old system that is dying. We are the vanguard, and I don't say that with ego. I'm not the vanguard. We are just representatives of a phenomenon that is happening on a civilization-wide scale right now, and I'm just amazed to be watching this happening and to be part of this wave. And I know I am just one wave in a vast ocean of change that's going on right now that is going to sweep over the shore and is already toppling the old paradigms. So, we just got to keep. It's not even a question of what we do or don't do. It is happening. So you can either be part of it or not, I guess.
And if you are honest, if you are true, people will support you, and you don't need as much money as you did 10 years ago to do this operation. All you need is just a willingness to put yourself out there, work really hard. Dan is living proof of this. Dan, with just the small operation that he has made really amazing documentaries, professionally made documentaries on just you guys supporting him. Do you want to talk about your kind of the career path that you're on right now?
Well, I think the three of us are blessed, really, to the point that we can actually do this for a living. And it's not like we have a lot of money. I personally am just barely staying afloat, but I have enough to continue to do this work. And that's the most important thing for me. It has nothing to do with money. I'm talking about what you were saying before. Selling products, I don't sell products. I'm not fully against it. And if you have to really believe in that product, if you're selling gold and silver, you better own gold and silver, and you better truly believe in that. So it's not about the materialism. It's just about the ideas and the meanings and the intentions behind it. So as long as money is not your object, and that you're not controlled by greed, well, then people are going to see that, and they're going to know that you're honest, you're true, you're decent, and they're going to recognize that.
Exactly. We're living in a time and moment in history that no one else in human history has ever gone through. In recorded human history, there never has been a time when one person, one voice could destroy all the mainstream media propaganda and lies with just honest speaking truth. And that truth has a way of flowing all the way around the world only because of you, your viewership, and your support. If you get a chance, check out Dan Dix of pressfortruth.ca. His link will be in the description below. James Corbett of the Corbett Report, really doing amazing work, and I've been blessed to have these two amazing independent journalists come here to Mexico to help me teach all the individuals that came here for the class. If you're not here for the class, we're giving you some of those lessons that we learned here. Very important things. It's an emerging, changing technology, but it's at our fingertips, and we control where it goes. Thank you again so much for watching.
Again, that was We Are Changed, Luke Radowski and James Corbett and Dan Dix. WeAreChange.org and We Are Change on YouTube. Check them out, subscribe. Give me a second here. Now, when you get into this, like they said, don't expect to get rich. Don't expect to make all kinds of money. That's not what you get into this. If that was why I got into this, I would have quit doing this, oh shoot, how long have I been doing the radio? Let alone, I started Anti-Tyranny News as one of those little cheap free blogs back in 2008, 2007, 2008, and went to more of a full-fledged website 2010, and I believe I've been doing this radio broadcast since 2012, 2013. I want to say 2012. If money was the goal, I wouldn't still be doing this. I would have stopped years ago. It takes money to do this. And even though you want to be able to put maybe AdSense on, if you're in alternative media, if you're exposing government corruption, if you're exposing, don't expect to be able to continue with a lot of these ad companies. Eventually, they will push you out. The bigger they become, they tend to get bought out, and then you're out. Now, people are like, well, you got ads on your website. Well, my ads are affiliated ads. These are companies that I personally use. And I think Dan said it perfectly. If you're going to put something on your website, make sure that you can say, hey, I personally use and support this. So in a way, when a lot of us lost our AdSense and our monetizations and stuff like that, it kind of in a way became a blessing, because those people that there's some that just couldn't afford to do it. They didn't have the opportunity to continue to do it without AdSense and other ad companies being on their website. They just couldn't afford to keep it running. I luckily have been fortunate enough to work a job that leaves me enough free time and enough cash to maintain. But it's very, very, I live by my bootstraps when it comes to funding my stuff. And in a way, I would like to have all donations, because to me that would say, hey, you really believe in what we're doing, and you're willing to not get anything other than us being able to maintain what we're doing out of it. But I'm also one of those people that I want people to be able to get things that they would normally get, buy, and use when they want to help out. And when people buy things already, if there's a way to do it so that you're also helping that alternative media, I like those options too. But be very wary. There's some websites out there that they have a million different things that they're trying to sell you to help your health. Not all are bad, but think about it. If you have to end up with a cabinet full of supplements, how much different is it becoming than the pharmaceutical company? Not saying that people don't need some supplements every once in a while, but there's a certain level, and I think that there are people out there that aren't doing things ethically, and I'm not going to call them out. I think it's up to each individual to really research what they're taking and reading and doing. Don't just take that one source. But if you're going to get into this field, don't do it for the money. Because honestly, there are a lot of people that have awoken to reality. They've left the fallacy. They've, let go of that cognitive dissonance, and they've really opened up. And those people will call you out if they believe that you're not telling the truth and you're just trying to make money. Again, I don't make money off of this. It does not even pay to keep itself going. A lot of that comes out of my personal money. And I'm willing to continue to do that for the message of freedom, for the message of liberty, to get the truth out there. But again, it does take a lot out of a person, mentally, physically, and, wealth-wise. And you might not always agree with me or others, but there's a certain level of respect that a lot of people in the alternative media, even competitors, have for each other, because it's not easy out there. And before we end the broadcast, I do want to give a shout out to UCY.tv. UCY has given me this platform, has given other hosts here on this network this platform to get our messages out there. And lucky for the host here, this isn't a platform that we pay to be on. A lot of us have been invited to this platform to get this message out, and I've worked with Jules in the past on another network, coming on as a guest on her show on that other network, and I'm just grateful that there are people out there that have the abilities to put up a network like this and allow us to use it for free. And one way you can help out, again, like I said, if you're going to go out there and shop for things, shop Amazon, well, go to UCY.tv, scroll down to the bottom, click the Amazon button. It helps out UCY. And more important than me, I think this network that gives multiple voices, multiple opinions, and multiple, sources of information out there is actually more vital than my website and me alone. So, you know, more important than me, I believe that it's imperative that people that want this information continue to get out there, support networks like UCY that are not just constantly streaming, you know, the mainstream narrative. And I can't imagine what it takes to keep this network going, but I know it's definitely hard work. Thanks again. Stay tuned here on UCY.tv.
The Anti-Media Radio with your host Nick Burnaby here on UCY.tv.